Armenian rhapsody. These were dangerous times. At some point in the 3rd century, in Colonia Aquincum, that's modern Budapest, someone built an organ of 4 rows and 13 pipes made of bronze. Thankfully, it was destroyed in a fire, but it was a clear sign no one was safe. Despite the persecutions, Christianity continued to expand. In the late 3rd century, it crossed into Armenia, with the conversion of King Tiridates III of Armenia. He was converted by Gregory the Illuminator, that's circa 257 to 331, the inventor of the light bulb. No, actually that's Illuminator as in enlightener, Gregory the Light Shedder. His relics are all over the place. His head is in Armenia, his right hand in Lebanon, and his left hand in Ejmiatsin Cathedral. The whereabouts of the light bulb are unknown. His life was written by people with brilliant names, including Moses of Kyrene, Simeon the Metaphrast, and a being called the Waterbed Matthew. Anyway, Gregory was allowed to build a church, and he oversaw the construction of the Holy Mother of God Church in a place called Vargarshafat in Armenia, modern-day Ejmiatsin. Going to have to learn to say that word. It still stands today, the oldest state-built church in the world. Armenia, then, is the oldest church state, the oldest Christian state. And of course, being in a hard-to-find place full of people with strange names, it has been pretty much ignored in the history of Christianity. Nonetheless, the fact is that it was the first country to declare Christianity its official religion. Many Armenians went to Jerusalem and settled there. In the 11th century, they bought the church on Mount Zion and dedicated it to St. James, or Srp Hagop, as he's called in Armenia. I love the names. It became the centre of the Armenian community, and they've been there living in the Armenian quarter ever since. In fact, there have been Armenians in Jerusalem continuously since the 4th century, which is longer, in fact, than the Jews and the Arabs can claim. If anyone has a right to Jerusalem, it might just be the Armenians. The Bible was translated into Armenian in the 5th century, and the story of its translation is not only interesting, but includes the best names in the history of the world ever. The account crops up in the writings of the brilliantly named historian Lazar of Farb, circa 500. He writes how a soldier called Mesrop Mashtots, died 439, became a Christian missionary, created a new alphabet, and then translated the Greek text into Armenian with the help of someone called Catholicos Sahak, aka Isaac the Great, 390 to 439. See what I mean about the names? All we're missing is a giant slug called something like Baba Vakut, and we'd be halfway to a Star Wars film. Diocletian. In the Roman Empire, though, Christians remained an easy target. You could pin anything you like on those Christians. They were the sect everyone loved to hate. Such rumours fuelled violence, but it was mostly very localised. However, all that changed in 303, when the Emperor Diocletian launched an empire-wide assault intended to wipe out Christianity forever. Diocletian was a glory boy, specifically a glory of Rome boy. He had a vision of the old empire, and he wanted to restore it. But the empire was old, inefficient. It needed modernising. So Diocletian introduced an efficient, many would say oppressive, bureaucracy. There were so many government bureaucrats that people complained that there were more men using tax money than there were paying it. He's the European Union's favourite Roman emperor. This is written before Brexit, by the way. And in a move that was to have enormous long-term consequences, he divided the empire into two, creating a Western and Eastern empire, each with an emperor and a deputy emperor, a management team of 4. Further, the empire was divided into 12 subsections, which Diocletian called dioceses. Christianity later took this name for its own administrative districts, which is ironic because Diocletian was one of the church's greatest enemies. At first he was not hostile to Christianity. For the first 2 decades of his reign he tolerated Christians, and his wife and daughter may even have been baptized. But then something changed. One story tells how during a religious ceremony one of his priests entirely failed to give an accurate prediction based on careful inspection of the liver of a chicken. When his failure was investigated, it was discovered that the fault was not in the priest, nor in the liver, but in the fact that some Christians nearby had crossed themselves rather than take part. Initially, Diocletian was inclined to believe that it was enough simply to ban Christians from public service and official positions, but his deputy Galerius insisted they must be exterminated. It started in Nicomedia, Diocletian's eastern capital, on the 23rd of February 303, with the destruction of church buildings and the confiscation of copies of the scriptures. The next day, Diocletian issued his first edict against the Christians, banning Christians from gathering for worship and ordering the burning of all Christian scriptures. A few weeks later, there was a fire in the imperial palace, which Galerius pinned on Christian conspirators. The executions culminated in the beheading of Antimus, Bishop of Nicomedia. From 303 onwards, there began a full-scale assault on Christianity. Churches were destroyed, clergy were killed, sacred scriptures and church vessels were confiscated and destroyed. Many Christians chose to protect the scriptures with their lives. In Thessalonica, a woman called Irene was found to have kept many parchments, books, tablets, small codices and pages hidden in cupboards and chests in her house. Her punishment was brutally Roman. She was placed naked in the public brothel, and the writings she had kept were ordered to be publicly burned. Eventually, she and 2 companions were burned at the stake in the spring of 304. Not everywhere saw such suffering. In Gaul, Spain, and Britain, Diocletian's appointed ruler Constantius didn't really enforce the edict. He demolished a few church buildings just to show willing, but after that did nothing. His colleagues in the east were not so lenient. Maximinus, the ruler of Palestine, Syria, and Egypt, was ferociously anti-Christian. The effects of this persecution in the east can be seen in the fact that in Serbian folk mythology, Diocletian is remembered as Dulcian, the enemy of God. Eusebius, who was living in Caesarea at the time, wrote a book describing the dreadful events. He claimed that in some areas so many were killed that the executioners were worn out and had to work in shifts. In Numidia, in Africa, the bishops were forced to surrender the church's sacred vessels, although one got out of it by pretending to be blind and claiming he couldn't find them. When the Bishop of Carthage was ordered to hand over sacred writings, he gave the soldiers the work of heretics. Since the soldiers were illiterate, they seemed happy enough with this. Of course, what the bishop was doing with heretical writings in the first place is an interesting question. Marcellinus, the Bishop of Rome, seems to have made a sacrifice to the emperor to escape punishment. Despite this, he is still called Saint Marcellinus. I'm not sure how he got away with that one. A 2-year reign of terror started to slow only when, in May 305, Diocletian took early retirement, moved to Dalmatia, and grew cabbages. He retired to his palace at modern-day Split, hence the famous Latin phrase, "Let's split." In the end, even the thug Galerius had a change of mind when he contracted bowel cancer. Realizing that Christianity was not going to go away, he ordered that the persecution stop and that the Christians would pray for him. I can't help but think that, despite Jesus' injunction to love their enemies, many Christians in the empire might have struggled just a bit with that request. The Great Persecution was the last attempt to wipe out Christianity by the empire. By the end of the 3rd century, Christianity had withstood many challenges. It had faced ridicule, discrimination, and persecution, but it had survived. It had dealt with heresy and schism, but it had held together. The Romans had made it legal, but it still continued to grow. However, in the 4th century AD, Christianity was to face its deadliest enemy of all: popularity. Bye now.